So these are the 193 cylinder heads from the other 350 I have. Now my memory is clearly not that good because I remember cleaning these and these ain't clean. So I guess we hot tanked these because there's no grease or anything on them, but the gasket surfaces are definitely not cleaned. So we'll have to wire wheel all that the same way we did everything else. I did some double checking, and these heads are out of a 1987 350 truck. I swapped out the valves in this tray, so these are the valves from this set of heads. I also dug out some of the other parts from this engine, and we'll show you exactly what happened to it. The rod caps are supposed to go on nice and easy and perfectly straight. I would hardly say that's easy. And then if we look at this guy, it's not quite round anymore. So what spinning a rod bearing means is that the two bearing shell halves, one on the top, one on the bottom of the connecting rod here, literally rotated within this assembly on the crankshaft. And as soon as that happens, you're pretty hooped. You can see the coloring change as you come down here, because these got hot. This is the crankshaft from that engine. And if you look over these rod journals, one of them is not like the others. This engine was driven for something like 20,000 miles after these bearings spun, which is something of a testament to the tenacity of a Chevy 350. He said it was knocking so bad the neighbors complained. This micrometer only measures down to 2 inches, 1.97 inches, which is just over 1/10 of an inch undersized. We took this engine apart 4 years ago, so it's not too surprising we'd forget some things about it. One thing that's going to be a pain is this plug. This is a 5/16 square, and I don't have anything that fits it. I already tried the heat and PB and everything, and I found this chisel fits in there perfectly. But even with that, the amount of force it's going to take to loosen this, I have 2 wrenches together here, and it's just bending the chisel, so that's not going to work. And the only real benefit to doing that is that I could reuse the plug. I'm not going to reuse this plug because it's a pain in the ass. So I double checked, and this is a steel plug, so we're just going to take this bolt, weld it in there, impact it out, and I never have to look at it again. And the other side head has a broken off intake manifold bolt. There's tons of thread showing here, so this should definitely be an easy one to get out. Put it on about 1.5 threads left. Like it was never even stuck. And for my mortal enemy here, again, we're just gonna weld this 3/8 inch bolt in there, and hopefully everything works out. Okay, come on. Yeah. Oh yeah. And the plug is ready to be reused. So if I had just pulled these heads off the vehicle, first step would be to clean them, to degrease them basically, the same thing we did with the engine block. Pressure washer, then soapy water, stuff like that, just scrub them down. Once they're pretty clean, which is about where they are right now, we are going to lap the valves, and then I'll just use the same wire wheel as before and remove all of the leftover gasket material. So all that's been done with these heads is that initial cleaning, and then a wire wheel cleaning of all of the valves. You can see there's no carbon or anything left on these. So valve lapping is very simple. All you're doing is taking an abrasive compound, putting it on the face of the valve, installing the valve into the guide, applying a little bit of pressure, and spinning it. What that abrasive compound is going to do is basically sand these surfaces smooth and make sure that this specific valve mates to this specific guide perfectly. So before we do that, let's clean these valve guides up. Since these heads have cast iron guides, I'm going to use this brass brush. This is a 44 caliber barrel cleaning brush, and it fits just perfect in these guides. Since these were cleaned and then sat around for a while, there's a bit of surface rust here and there. So I want to make sure there's no rust in here when we're turning these valves to lap them. Just spray a little lube in there, and press the brush in, make sure it goes all the way through the guide. Spray that out with brake clean, and then we'll go ahead and lap this valve. Like anything else, there are tons of ways to do this. I'm going to do the lazy way and use the drill. All this is a tap driven into a 1/4 inch hose, and these are 5/16 valves. So you can press the 1/4 inch hose onto the valve stem so it grips it nice and tight. And all you're gonna do is put your valve lapping compound on, insert the valve into the guide, and then on the other side of the cylinder head, connect the hose, give it a little bit of pressure, and spin. And that's really all there is to that. Because this stuff is so abrasive, you do want to be careful of where it's ending up. You do not want to put any of this into the valve guide. You can pretty much use as much as you want. This stuff is cheap enough that it's not really worth worrying about. Put just a bit of motor oil on the valve to make sure it's not running dry in the guide. And then we'll just start turning. The reason you want to keep lifting it is so that you can let all the valve grinding compound kind of move around in there. Otherwise you're just running it dry. What you're looking for is an even, dull color on the face of the valve, and this one needs a little bit more to get there.
You can see there's still some splotches there, so it's not all one even color.
So we'll just put a little more oil in here, a little bit more compound, and we'll have another go. Okay, let's have another look. It's getting there. These valves are awfully chewy. This might take some time.
That's much, much better. It's getting there.
With valves this bad, you would take them to a machine shop and have them grind everything. That's sort of the theme here, me extolling the virtues of machine shops and not using one. You can see how it starts off this really glittery, dark kind of color, and it's a real thick paste, but by the end it's very light colored, it's watery. That's because all the big grit particles have been broken down.
It's seeming like this is going to be a long process.
Very close, one more, and it'll be there.
There's only a couple little pits left.
You want to make sure you keep your valves in order and you know which cylinder head is which. This one I actually have marked 1357 to be absolutely clear that it is the driver's side head. Now it wouldn't matter if you put this back on the passenger side, but since I'm ordering the valves by 1357 and driver and passenger side, you need to make sure you get the valves back in the right spots. I'm applying pressure with this hand. I'm not really pulling with the drill. The drill is just spinning the valve. An alternate method is you can use a hose clamp to keep this hose real tight on the end of the valve stem and then just pull with the power tool. Yep, that looks pretty good. I think it's about as good as we're going to be able to get it.
So we've come out of that with a very smooth, even seat color and a smooth and even valve face.
So this valve and seat is lapped very nicely. Everything should seal super well. There's only 15 more to go. Ideally, with the cylinder heads off and everything, you'd want to check for valve guide wear, you want to check this and that and this and that, but as with some of the other things on this engine, even if there was something wrong, I wouldn't be doing anything about it. Now I'm going to go through and clean out all the threaded holes. With all the gasket removed, that's pretty much everything. We're just going to take some soap and water and wipe them down. Try to get everything as clean as possible.
I'm gonna clean them off the same way I clean the block, although I only mentioned it in the video. We're just using hot water, dish soap, and a stiff plastic brush. And then we'll rinse it off really well. Now we'll take it back inside to the air compressor. And once it's completely dry, we'll spritz it down with WD-40 and move on to the next head. Now that they're clean, we're going to start putting the cylinder heads back together. Start off with cylinder number 1. I'm going to give everything one last good clean before it goes together. So the seals I'm using are the ones that came with that rebuild kit. These are umbrella type seals because they don't have a band around them. For the intake valves, you kind of want a positive seal that does have that band, but it came with 16 of these, so we're just going to go ahead and use them for all the valves. The O-ring type of valve seal sits on the stem and keeps oil from dripping down the stem and through the guide. Sometimes, like on the 191 heads we took apart, it doesn't even have an umbrella seal or a positive seal or anything down here, and it just uses these O-rings. So by using both, hopefully the oil will be under control. Slide the umbrella seal on. And for the exhaust valves like this, remember you're going to have this part of the retainer and the rotator that turns the valve, so you want to make sure this rotates freely. Slide it over the valve stem. It's going to go back on the same way it came off the valve spring compressor that we modified. Start tightening it and compressing that spring. You want to compress the spring enough that we can both get the O-ring on the valve stem and the keepers. So there are 2 grooves in the valve stem. This top one is for the keepers, and this bottom one is where that O-ring seal is going to sit. So we have to make sure we get it over this ridge and all the way into that groove. Let's try this. Take 2 screwdrivers, push it all the way to the seat. Yep, that looks good to me. Okay, now we'll take 2 of the keepers that we cleaned, them on the valve stem, very carefully. As long as you hold them in that groove, the spring should seat them just right on its own. And then to fully seat that, and to make sure everything's not going to fly up and kill us, give it a tap right on the end of the valve stem. And make sure the valve is opening, and it is. Everything feels good. Okay, now we'll go through that again for the number 1 intake valve. Oil on the valve stem, then slide it in through the guide. And again, intake valves on these don't have rotators, it's just a little top hat. The umbrella seal on, and the spring and retainer. Then the spring compressor. And I'm calling these O-rings, but they're actually, you can see they're square cut. Push down, a little push over the ramp into the second groove. And there we go. And you take your keepers, and if you end up having trouble, you can put some Vaseline or assembly lube or something like that on these guys. That'll keep them in place while you get this all tight. Try to keep your fingers out of the way just in case, but just touching the ends of them. Again, we'll just take the hammer, make sure the valve moves, and you're done, except for the other 14 valves. So now the cylinder heads are all back together. When going through, I noticed that one of these rotators was completely locked up, so I just went and grabbed one from the spare set of heads. But if you have some locked up like this, these have already been soaked, but soak them in some solvent and just keep trying to wiggle them around. Maybe use pliers or something if you have to. But if you really can't get them turning, you might need new ones. But that's that. So now we can get back to the engine block.